The bishop's opening arises when white begins with the move pawn to e4. Black responds with pawn to e5, and then white plays bishop to c4, an highly effective and cool opening. Black counters with knight to f6, one of the most common responses, targeting the pawn on e4. However, white decides to counter aggressively with pawn to d4, breaking open the center. This move poses a significant challenge for black. For instance, after black captures the pawn on d4, white continues instead of recapturing the pawn, breaking open the center. This move poses a significant challenge for black. For instance, after black captures the pawn on d4, white continues instead of recapturing the pawn. White responds with queen to d4, gaining a strong position early in the game. This move gives white a lead in development, additional tempo by attacking the knight, and the ability to castle quickly and launch an aggressive attack. At this point, black is in a tough spot and must play very precisely to avoid being checkmated quickly. If black tries playing knight to d6, aiming to gain tempo by attacking white's bishop or trading material, this is already a losing mistake. Can you believe that? White simply castles kingside, and black has no defense against the quick attack along the e-file. White will play rook to e1 regardless of black's response. For example, if black captures on c4, instead of recapturing, white continues with the move rook to e1, delivering check to the king. Black is forced to block with bishop to e7, and now, instead of taking the pawn on c4, white has an even stronger move, queen takes g7. By doing so, white grabs the pawn and simultaneously attacks the rook on h8, leaving black defenseless. The only way for black to save the rook is by playing rook to f8, but white has a beautiful follow-up, bishop to h6. This move creates the threat of queen takes f8 checkmate. Black is completely pinned, as the f8 square is locked, and the rook cannot escape capture. White's dominance in this position shows just how devastating and tricky the bishop's opening can be. In this example, black is demolished in just a few moves by seemingly natural opening moves. This highlights the power and effectiveness of the bishop's opening, even against standard responses like knight to f6, followed by white's aggressive pawn to d4. If you prefer a more solid game rather than a sharp one, you can play pawn to d3 to solidify the pawn on e4, ensuring that black cannot capture it. At this point, black may be tempted to play pawn to d5, thinking white's moves have been timid. By playing d5, black aims to seize control of the center, which is a common and logical idea in most chess openings. However, in the bishop's opening, this d5 move can backfire, even though it's difficult to immediately see why. The issue arises after white plays knight to f3, targeting the pawn on e5. While black can initially defend it, white castles kingside, planning to play rook to e1 and put additional pressure on the e5 pawn. At this point, black has no convenient way to defend the pawn. If black tries to use the bishop from f8 to defend, white can capture on d5, exploiting the fact that the queen on d8 no longer supports the d5 pawn. This often results in white winning the knight on d5. In one example, black played bishop to g4, pinning white's knight to the queen. White responded with pawn to h3, forcing the bishop to retreat, and then proceeded with rook to e1, creating an uncomfortable position for black by targeting the e5 pawn. To defend the pawn, black played pawn to f6, but this further weakens their position and demonstrates how tricky the bishop's opening can be. Just look at this, black does everything in their power to prevent you from capturing the pawn on e5. They pin your knight to the queen, defend the pawn with another pawn, and seem to have it all under control. You go ahead and capture the pawn on e5. This creates a beautiful combination where you're willing to sacrifice your queen on d1. After black takes your queen, you deliver a powerful counterblow with knight takes c6, attacking black's queen while also giving a check to the king. This means you'll regain your queen on the next move. For example, if black moves their king to f7 or anywhere else, you first capture the queen. After rook takes d8, you then pick up the bishop on d1. When the dust settles, you count the material and see that white is up a piece and a pawn. At this point, black can simply resign. Moving on to another game, let's consider an alternative where black wisely avoids pawn to d5 and instead plays a more natural move, bishop to c5. Against this setup, white has an interesting opening idea. Play knight to c3, delaying the development of the kingside knight. On the next move, white can play pawn to f4, combining elements of the king's gambit with the bishop's opening. The key difference here is that white isn't sacrificing the f4 pawn because it's already defended by the queenside bishop. For instance, if black responds with pawn to d6, white can now bring out the kingside knight. By pushing the f4 pawn, white creates strong attacking prospects in the middle game. Often, white will continue advancing the f4 pawn, disrupting black's kingside position and restricting the mobility of black's pieces, such as the bishop. This strategy provides white with a dynamic and aggressive position to play for an advantage. This setup also prepares your bishop to move forward, and thanks to your space advantage, it becomes easier to develop a kingside attack. In this position, many opponents might be tempted to play knight to g4, thinking that your unconventional opening is flawed. After knight to g4, black may aim to play knight to f2, forking your queen and rook, which looks very advantageous. Alternatively, they might plan to move their bishop to f2 to check your king and start an attack from there. Either way, it may seem like white is in trouble and has made a mistake. However, the refutation is stunning. This is a counterblow in the purest sense of the word. In response to knight to g4, you play knight to g5, counter-attacking in the exact same fashion. Your knight targets the f7 pawn, threatening a superior attack compared to black's. If black continues with knight to f2, ignoring your threat and attacking your queen and rook, it actually works in your favor. You respond by bringing your queen out, further strengthening your kingside attack. At this point, queen takes f7 becomes an unstoppable threat, delivering checkmate in one move. Black's aggressive play ends up backfiring. As your attack is faster and more decisive, black must respond to the threats, and after a move like pawn to g6, white can begin attacking black's king. White plays bishop takes f7, delivering a check to the king. The king cannot move to f8 because white would then play queen to h6, delivering another check. In the game, black tried king to e7, but this was not safe either. White followed up with knight to d5, delivering a check. The king retreated to d8, but white continued with bishop to e6, humorously chasing black's king deeper into their own territory. The king eventually ran back to e8, but with no more immediate checks available, white played queen to h6. This move not only saves the queen but also sets up a powerful continuation, preparing for queen to g7, which attacks the rook and threatens queen to f7 checkmate. Black, in an attempt to reduce the pressure, tried trading pieces. However, after knight takes e6, white unleashed multiple threats. The knight attacked black's queen on d8, and threatened knight takes c7, creating overwhelming pressure. White's two knights dominated the position, attacking nearly everything in black's territory. Black tried moving the queen away, but this failed as white delivered a decisive knight to f6, forking the king and rook. This attack was so crushing that black had no choice but to resign. This is yet another beautiful example of how incorporating elements of the king's gambit into the bishop's opening can lead to a swift and decisive attack, overwhelming black in just a few moves. Thank you for watching this video on the bishop's opening. As we've seen, this opening may appear unconventional at first, but it's incredibly powerful and filled with tactical opportunities. By prioritizing development, controlling the center, and targeting weak points in black's position, the bishop's opening can quickly put your opponent on the back foot.